Is this okay with my voice? And
You're fine.
okay. So, most people, I've been a teacher here for 23 years and a football coach around here, on and off for about 44 years. And this evening, I'm going to be doing a really neat thing. I'll be down at the King Harbor Yacht Club, and we are having a 4-class reunion of our original 4 graduating classes, 1953 through 1956. And as I said at the Hall of Fame induction about 2 or 3 weeks ago, if you quickly do the math, every person at that reunion tonight will be somewhere between 76 and 81 years old. So I was just talking to one of the organizers last night, and you get ready to go to a reunion and you're very excited, and it's funny about reunions, in your head everybody is stuck at 18 years old. And he said he got a call from one of the people that said they were not going to be able to make it down here tonight because they'd fallen out of their wheelchair. And he goes, how do you, wait a minute, we're high school graduates. So anyway, I'll be doing that tonight. Something that Bill Furnell will appreciate. 2 days ago, I happened to be at a memorial service for Coach Ed Hyduke.
Yep.
And that really fits in very closely with these original graduates, because Ed Hyduke, he was not an original teacher at Mira Costa, but I believe he arrived here by 1953, and all of those people there tonight will know him. And the gathering over there at the mortuary 2 days ago was just phenomenal. I mean, the love that these people had, not only for Coach Hyduke, but for the schools around here. I mean, it really didn't matter. The people there were coaches and students and been players of his at Mira Costa, at Aviation, and eventually he helped his son coach at Redondo and South. And just what a gathering of people. So I think on the email that was sent to everybody, it said, hey, Chuck's going to talk about the history of Mira Costa. I'm really not going to talk too much about the history of Mira Costa. I'm talking about what happened before we built Mira Costa. And so I don't want to scare anybody, but we're going to go back to the mid-1800s. But we'll move forward fast. So here's how I got involved in all of this. Right now, I'm heading up what's known as the Mira Costa History Project. We've somehow made it 66 years without a written history of the high school, and that seemed to be a real shame. So for about 2 years now, we've been starting to do the research and documentation and record, the people and events that have made the high school what it is. And really, I started with this probably about 4 years ago, maybe even actually it was probably about 14 years ago. But I had always heard this story that, Mira Costa, we got the land from, a Japanese family that was interned at Tule Lake. And I've read that in a number of different places. And boy, we stole the land, and it was a heck of a deal. And so one day I decided, you know what, I used to be a real estate broker. It's easy enough to figure out who bought what from who and when they bought it, and stuff like that. So I decided I'm going to get to the bottom of this. So I started researching. First of all, were these people who were these people that bought the property? Okay, so I went to the county recorder's office and I dug up the original deed and got the name of the people. Their name was Oyamatsu, and they owned what was known as Star Nurseries, and the base of their operation was actually in Montebello, but they had purchased land out here, and it was part of their wholesale nursery business. So I started checking around on the internet. eventually everything sort of led to, if you want to know where somebody may have been interned, you just get in touch with the Japanese American Museum in downtown LA, and they keep the master database. So I called down there. I got in touch with one of the researchers. I told him the name of the family, and he immediately started sending me information. He says, oh, they weren't at Tule Lake, they were at Manzanar. And he said, do you want the actual induction record when they brought in the family and all the information on it? Sure, send that to me. And he says, and then I also have when they all were released from the camp and on and on. And so, and then he started telling me, well, maybe you could figure out when the father came from Japan, and maybe we can check shipping logs and see what port he came in. I'm just like, wow. And I said, I just wanted to kind of know what camp they were in. So anyway, he's getting me excited about being able to know all this stuff. And then, after about an hour on the phone with him, here's what he leaves me with. He said, you ever thought maybe you could find one of the family members? I said, that was World War II. And he said, you might be surprised. I said, well, thanks for all the information. I said, if I wanted to try to do that, what the heck would I even do? He said, we use stuff like Ancestry.com and websites like that. He said, you'd be surprised what's possible. So I hung up. The next thing I know, it wasn't 5 minutes later. What are these? It's just like, no, start. And sure enough, one by one, there's the father died in this year, the mother died. They had some amazing longevity. Most of them lived to the late 80s and early 90s. And pretty soon, I've accounted for, there were about 7 family members. I've accounted for all but one. The one, it's a female. Oh, be a married name. Oh, this is going to get harder. Yeah, might as well give it a shot anyway. So, the next thing I know, I found this person. Lives in Claremont, California. This was 2 years ago. At that time, 87 years old. And I thought, why not send her a letter if I've done all this? Send her a letter. Didn't hear back for a few weeks. Then I'm sitting there in my classroom, and here's an email. The subject says, you found me. And I thought, it was like, I was just like giddy to, I just, like this. And she said, I'm the person you're looking for. So, it said my family owned the land there in Manhattan Beach, and I'm happy to help you any way I can. So I'm in pretty regular contact with her. She's introduced me to other generations of her family. Obviously you're here, I'm preaching to the choir, but this stuff is so much fun and so interesting, especially with the internet, what you can possibly know. So what you see up on the screen is just this, and I'll get through that real fast and get to the meatier, more recent things. That is the original Rancho Sazal Redondo. It was 22,000 acres, and a family owned that, the Avila family. I think they got it in about the 1830s. It was granted to them, and so this is our area. Most of our area. You would think that if it's called Rancho Sazal Redondo, that it would include Redondo. It only includes North Redondo. So down there at the bottom black line, that essentially starts at the Redondo Breakwater, comes up 190th Street, and then it angles along Ripley. And I don't mean sort of along Ripley, I mean the historic borders, which we're now able to take the coordinates off one map and overlay it on another like this. I mean up 190th, turn left and veer toward the original South Bay Center along the street Ripley. Then it continues on Redondo Beach Boulevard, which, of course, really lines up with Ripley before the South Bay Center was ever there. And then it goes out to Prairie. So on the eastern boundary, that goes straight up prairie. And once again, not near prairie, it is prairie. So, my assumption is that most of these paths, the major paths existed and were boundaries for things, So then you get up into Inglewood. I think the Forum is actually right on one of those. And up in the far north, right down the channel of Marina del Rey. So all the way up to Marina del Rey and all the way down to 190th Street. Not a single bit of South Redondo is involved in what's known as Rancho Sazal Redondo. All right. Then, matter of fact, maybe I'll stay here. I do this with no notes, and I warn you about that. Sometimes people are worried if you pull out and you have a bunch of notes, but I love everything about Mira Costa High School. I graduated from Mira Costa. My daughter graduated from Mira Costa. My dentist graduated from Mira Costa. My doctor graduated from Mira Costa. Actually, I'm sort of on my second generation of my dentist. It's now his son, who's my dentist, Brian Withers and Jim Withers. So, and as a matter of fact, you were talking about the gas station on Highland. I think that was Claude Withers' gas station. Yeah, and then eventually it was the Wooden Shoe and on and on. So anyway, I got married at my high school football coach's house. Of course, that was my first marriage. Maybe that's a PowerPoint for another time. I don't know. So here we've jumped forward to 1897, and Rancho Sazal Redondo passes through a couple of hands. Most notably, you'd pick up the name of Daniel Freeman. He was I believe, the last owner of the entire Rancho Sazal Redondo. Then Redondo Land Company buys the portion that ends up being Manhattan Beach and surrounds. And so right there in an 1897 mapping, of how Redondo Land Company chopped it up, there's Mira Costa in the green, the southern half of an original 80-acre parcel. In the early part, how many of you have heard of the Duncan Ranch House? I mean, if you're historical society people. So the Duncan Ranch House, you see the red ball up there by Kuhn Drive? That would be the location as close as anybody can, place it, of the Duncan Ranch House. And it would come all the way down to Artesia Boulevard, which was Gould back then, and go all the way down to the water, and it'd be 190 acres that Blanton Duncan owned. The Mira Costa property was never part of the Duncan property. However, by the time we get to 1915, George C. Martin owns, I would say it's probably around 24 to 30 acres that includes the original Duncan Ranch House. And in 1915, his son buys the 80 acres that includes Mira Costa High School. So at that point in time, essentially 120 acres has then been put together in the ownership of the Martin family. Now we move forward to the 1920s and the oil boom in California. The two red dots on the eastern edge right by Peck Avenue, one of them that would be right next to the ticket booth where you go into the football game at Waller Stadium, and the other one that is really underneath our social studies buildings here, right, just 50 feet in from the center line of Peck. Those were the first two oil exploration wells ever drilled in Manhattan Beach. What does it mean to be an exploration well? It means you're a wildcat driller. In other words, there are no known reserves underneath Manhattan Beach at that time. These guys are drilling because as close as just below Gould Avenue are some, in Hermosa Beach there's oil. East of us in Lawndale, there's plenty of oil. The further south in South Redondo, there's plenty of oil, and you've probably all seen pictures of all the derricks and drilling rigs that were in that period of time. Nobody ever got any oil in Manhattan Beach. You get a little bit of oil here, and you get a little bit of gas there, and I'm not sure if they're talking about natural gas or just from the problems of spending all that money to drill a mile and a half down and find nothing. So then so this is in 1924, those two first oil wells. The blue star in the middle of the Mira Costa property is a water well drilled in 1918. They had water at about 300 feet. And it'd be interesting to know what the water table is these days. But when we began to construct Mira Costa, which is sort of jumping ahead, but I'll throw this in, they were still aware that there was a well right in the middle of the 40 acres, and they directed an engineer to tell them, is this something we could use for a water supply or what? Even if it's just for construction, let's check that well out. So I never saw anything in the Manhattan Beach News after that was mentioned, and I know that eventually we have to run water from quite a ways away to supply that property. But 1918 water well, 1924 two oil wells, one of them down to about 6,000 or 7,000 feet, and nothing. So these oil wells, it's amazing how fast these things would change hands. Somebody would drill down 4,000 feet, and then it'd be one of these. Then you'd see a letter to the, I don't know whether it was the state geological, it'd be, hey, so-and-so's taken over my well, we're moving on. And so then they would drill it down maybe another 1,000 feet. Then the next thing you know, hey, so-and-so's taken over well number 1 and we're moving on. So here's an interesting one. All these records are available. In other words, going all the way back into the 1920s, you can see layer by layer what's underneath Mira Costa. You can see where they hit some oil. You can see where they hit some gas. It's incredible detail. So I start reading one of these. All of a sudden I think, wow, a thing called the Manhattan Beach Oil Company, the president of the Manhattan Beach Oil Company is Alexander Pantages of Pantages Theaters. At one time he owned the most theater houses in the western United States, and eventually, he really gets into, who knows what is fact and what is fiction, gets into a real deal with Joseph Kennedy over an offer made for RKO to buy all the Pantages theaters, and then he didn't want to sell, and then, suspiciously bad things begin to happen to Pantages and his wife. So anyway, these are some of the fun things you find when you've been digging into some of these little details. So now let's jump to the 1930s, and we're still focused right on the Mira Costa 40 acres. This is the Francis M. Oyamatsu family. He was an extremely successful wholesale nurseryman. But it was more than that. He was on the cutting edge of temperature-controlled, grafting and propagation of camellias, cherry trees, poinsettias, trying to think what else. And on this property, even after Mira Costa was built, there were still greenhouses down where the district office building is. And Ted Gossard, who I met for the first time about 1.5 years ago, I said, hey Ted, we're trying to put as much detail into the history of Mira Costa as we possibly can. You were there. Tell me something that nobody would know about the very beginnings of Mira Costa. Ted's sitting there at his house and he goes, here's one, Chuck. And okay, I'm just hanging on every word. And he said, there were greenhouses, down, to the north of the property. He said, students used to sneak off campus and study biology in those. and I mean, he had this little. Let me get that down, Ted. So in the early 1950s, there were still probably Oyamatsu built greenhouses around the fringe of the property here and there. So in the 1930s, the Oyamatsus and Star Nurseries are doing so well that an oil driller approaches them about their property in Montebello and wants to do some drilling. And he says, we can just drill on this corner of your property and we'll lease part of the property and so forth. And he goes, give it a shot, because, he had, I don't know how many acres he had. Eventually that became a school also. It's very interesting. But, so here's what goes on. The oil driller supplies Oyamatsu with an introduction to a real estate broker who somehow makes this connection to a 120-acre property that's available in Manhattan Beach and says, hey, come on down, take a look at this. Oyamatsu is not really even worried about whether there's oil under his property in Montebello or not. He just comes down here, he just loves it. And it's not, ostensibly it's for his wholesale nursery business, but in his own biography, he loves that property and he refers to it as the Manhattan Beach Estate. You don't refer to your business property as the Manhattan Beach Estate. So he purchases the property in 1938 during the Great Depression, as far as I can see from all records, with no loans. And it then becomes somewhat interesting. Well, okay, I need to find the darn deed. I see it in his biography. I can find it at the Hall of Records, but I need to, to see exactly what happened. So one day, I go to, Steve is kind enough to open up the Historical Society for me to do some research, and this was about, 2 years ago, maybe more. And I said, the Manhattan Beach News, I want to go through the Manhattan Beach News, and they used to be in the back room, where it was warm. and he goes, oh, they're not in there anymore. We've moved them to right next to the restroom in Pollywood Park in the concrete block building. It's December. He opens the door, and I'm like, okay, all right, I'm into this. Okay, I get my jacket on, and I sit down in there. The restroom's in the other side of the wall. I'm not sitting on the toilet, but I'm sitting on a box or something that I'm paging through. So anyway, I come across how they got the property. Matter of fact, on stories about the Duncan Ranch House and how the George Martin owned it, it says George Martin died in 1937, and the family put the property up for sale. I thought, okay. I looked for death certificates, couldn't find them. Then I'm paging through 1937, 1930. Here I go. Oh. Hey, George Martin and his son are in default. They've been in default for a while. Oh, scheduling a trustee sale, foreclosure time. And this was a loan that they took out on the property in the early 1930s. He owned an iron works in downtown LA. He was actually very well known, and for just a few months he was actually a Manhattan Beach City Councilman. And so all of a sudden I thought, oh, this sounds a lot more plausible than he died one year and we're putting the property up for sale. And sure enough, I followed it right to the trustee's sale. and it goes back to an insurance company that made him the loan in the early 1930s. Then, the Oyamatsus purchased in 1938, and to this day I've never found that deed, but I know they owned it because I can nail every darn sale after that, but I cannot, make that one little tight connection. So, this is a picture of the Oyamatsu family in March of 1941. Not all the family members are in the picture, but they are standing probably about where the library might be right now. They are, in other words, the 40 acres, here's the road going from Gould up onto their property. Their property is a giant L shape that goes all the way up to 2nd Street and all the way over to Sepulveda. It includes, the Manhattan Car Wash area. And here they are, and it even says at the bottom of the picture, the 120-acre Manhattan estate. So this was more than a place to run your business. He really thought this was going to be, where they would eventually be living or something like that. So as you see them standing there in that picture, in just a few months, their world's going to be turned completely inside out. And it's like you're looking at this and you just think, wow, life is good for them right now. I mean, life isn't easy. In other words, we had plenty of laws that tried to make it so if you were Japanese, you couldn't own a piece of property in California. But somehow, Francis Oyamatsu not only bought this, but owned 2 or 3 properties in the Montebello area. And, how is this being accomplished? I mean, in like 1913 and 1920, we passed these heavy-duty alien land acts in California, and it wasn't a friendly place for Japanese to live. And yet he is, succeeding unbelievably. So, these are the typical, Pearl Harbor occurs, and at the very same time, just a few months after that original picture where they're with the family on the road coming up from Gould, his son dies. Just a freak playground accident, falls, hits his head, has some convulsions a few nights later, and that's it. So, son dies, here comes Pearl Harbor. By February, here comes the Executive Order 9066, and the next thing you know, the Oyamatsus are shipped off to Pomona Fairgrounds to be, then on to Manzanar eventually. So, these are all, sort of famous historical photos, very difficult time. During this very difficult time, there were certainly a lot of opportunists. I mean, the stories of property and everything being, just essentially stolen, it goes books and books and books. I mean, you don't need to search for it. So here's something that happens. He is a breeder of camellias, and I mean heavy-duty, hundreds of breeds that he has brought himself from Japan. He has so many different breeds of camellias that many of them just sort of languish in some of his greenhouses in Montebello and probably down here. Manchester Bodie, who is the publisher of the LA Daily News and the owner of Rancho Descanso, which we know as Descanso Gardens, approaches him after Executive Order 9066 and buys upwards of 260,000 camellias from the Oyamatsu Star Nurseries. Many, many years go by, and even to this day, Oyamatsu doesn't receive full credit for all of these breeds of camellias. And even in the 1950 Camellia Annual, which is the Bible of camellias, they even state these certain breeds were developed by this man, and that he has never been given credit, and that is just sort of the law of they buy the camellias. Then Something seems to be flipped here. Anyway, he names one of the camellia breeds after his wife, Bernice. And so I went out to the Shanso Gardens, and bingo, there's a little thing. It mentions Oyamatsu. It talks about what he did. And so here you are in the Shanso Gardens, and he gets it's about the size of an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper that makes mention of him. Somehow I have the feeling that, oh, okay. So the Oyamatsus end up in Manzanar. I think they go in there in August of that year. And as you can imagine, it's not easy. You own a business, and now you're away from the business, and you don't even know for how long. His manager takes over, and as he says in his biography, his manager saw him as being an enemy combatant. So it's easy to rationalize how, let me see, we sold a plant, here's a couple of bucks for Oyamatsu, and here's a couple of bucks for me. So Oyamatsu begins having to sell off parcels of the 120 acres bit by bit to be able to maintain his wholesale nursery business while he's interned at Manzanar. And up there on the screen, all the dates of the sales, and they start happening in 1944, and there's actually 2 or 3 sales in 1944. The interesting part is this. All of a sudden I notice when I have all the deeds, wow, here's a guy who's a big shot in Manhattan Beach, the Kuhn family, and they're buying quite a few of these parcels. Then later on I come to understand, wow, Nathan Robert Kuhn is on the school board of the Redondo Beach Union High School district from 1943 on. So in 1946, there's the population of the towns. Hermosa and Manhattan are about the same. Since 1930, the population of Manhattan Beach had grown 538% in that 16-year period. I mean, these were exciting times. We couldn't build houses fast enough. We couldn't build schools fast enough. It mentions we first installed parking meters in the beach cities. I mean, it's a lot of fun to go through these, through these old books. And once again, Kuhn is on the school board in November, actually scheduled for November, but it ends up being put off till December. They pass a $1.3 million school bond. Most of it is to build more classrooms for Redondo High School. But then at the very bottom of the priority list, they mention land for the erection of a new high school in the north end of the district. And they estimated that it would be about $100,000 to buy a piece of property suitable for a new high school. So the bond passes, and by February, they're already negotiating on the 40 acres right here on the corner of Peck and, at that time, Gould. They get it for $60,000. It doesn't seem like a total coincidence to me that Kuhn family had done 3 or 4 transactions with the Oyamatsus, and then suddenly we have a deal for a nice 40 acres, part of their land. So if you read a newspaper, it'll say something like, some realtors brought this to the board of, the school board, and even though it wasn't on the market, they had some knowledge that it might be available. I think one of the board members had an idea that it might be available. So by May 7th, the Redondo Union High School District owns the property, and at that time it's just referred to as Hermosa Manhattan High School. Now, it doesn't really have a name yet, it just has a name that doesn't upset anybody. Then here is, I think it was Samuel London. This is his original concept in 1948 of everything Mira Costa High School. In other words, up there you really see probably 80% of what we end up with, years later. And just like when you go to an architect and you say, here, I want to build a house. I mean, even if it's just a room addition, it looks like, the greatest room addition on the face of the earth. And you go, wow, I mean, the roof and the windows and all the, the landscaping. So that is the original concept of Mira Costa. And here's what you start with. So this is what we'll have one day, and this in blue is what we actually had when the high school was dedicated in mid-September of 1950. So there were about 22 classrooms. There was a boys and girls locker room, but there was no gym between the two locker rooms. And Ted Gossard, Ted, tell me some more stuff that nobody knows, Ted. So he goes, I got another one for you, Chuck. And I'm ready with a pen again. He said, in the boys' locker room, we didn't have any hot water. And I thought, maybe that was a plan, Ted. So we got studying biology in the greenhouses, and we got cold showers. And this, I'm thinking that this was, somebody mapped this out. So anyway, this is how we began, and things moved fast after that. We started on the original gym, I think within the first 12 months, or possibly the next spring. But these days, a bond issue, holy cow, they were almost passing bond issues to a year. And originally, what built Mira Costa was money from the state of California bond issue. They had passed a bond for $20 million to pay for what were referred to as distressed school districts. How do you like to be a distressed school district? All they really meant is you can't house all your students. Most of the schools around here were on double session. We were bursting at the seams. Redondo was bursting at the seams. And so we began to build as fast as we possibly could. We received $1.4 million of a $20 million state bond issue all came to us. In other words, we had so many darn kids and such a shortage of buildings that I think that was the largest allocation to a school district in the entire state. Pretty amazing. And that's where we, really that isn't where we are today. I'm not even fully updated on stuff. We're building so fast these days that if you don't have an aerial that's within 12 months, you don't see everything that we really have already. But certainly we've been amazingly fortunate over the years, to have a property like Mira Costa, and it's tomorrow morning. The 4 classes will have a picnic at Valley Park, and they will board a bus and come up here at 10 a.m. and I'll open the gates and tour them through the campus. And for some of these people, they haven't seen the campus in, 65 years or something like that. So it's really going to be pretty cool. Hopefully a nice sunny morning, but that'll be a special deal for them. Thank you.